inviting me, and thank you everyone who decided to come out today. I know we're still a little bit maybe transitioning into in-person events, but I think it's really special that we're able to be here. I feel really honored to be here. I see some familiar faces, but I see a lot of new faces, which I think is even more exciting. So as Hannah said, I am an alumna of PSU and of Hillel, and I graduated, I realized today, almost 10 years ago. And I feel, no offense to anyone else in the room, I'm feeling a little old.
Wait a minute.
But it's really important for me to be here today because all of what Hannah just read about me would not have happened without my time here in Portland and at PDX Hillel. So let's back up a little bit and start with where I come from. So I come from a mixed family. My mother is Chinese American and my father is, you know, your good old Ashkenazi boy from the valley. And they somehow came together and lived in Sacramento, and that's where I'm from. I grew up in Sacramento, and my father had a lot of trouble with his Jewish identity. He didn't like feeling different. He didn't like feeling other, so he really it wasn't so important to him, and he put it to the side. And so it wasn't something that he really brought into the home in a strong way. We definitely did Hanukkah, and our Hanukkah was next to a Christmas tree, very American for all intents and purposes. My grandmother, his mom, we love her so much. She is a self-proclaimed atheist Jewish woman in Berkeley, you can imagine. We had Passover every year, but there was no Haggadah because we wouldn't use a religious text. We would read a different book that told the story, and so this was kind of my Jewish upbringing. I always knew I was Jewish and Chinese, and if anyone asked me, I would very quickly answer, oh, I'm half Chinese and I'm half Jewish, but I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't equipped with the language or the knowledge to explain how could I be half Jewish, a term that I no longer use anyway, but how could I be Jewish and not religious? How could I be Jewish and never go to synagogue or keep kosher or all of these things that both sometimes Jews, but mostly non-Jews were telling me that you're not really Jewish. And that was something that stuck with me my entire life. So fast forward through 4 years of Catholic high school, not for religious purposes, for academic purposes, and then I went to college. College is the natural step to a time where we explore who we are, and I wanted to explore being Jewish. So my first stop was Hillel, and it actually happened, some people may know this story, I think Kelsey maybe knows the story. I met with a friend of mine from high school who went to Lewis and Clark, and her friend was there, Ava Greenberg. And I said, oh, Greenberg, that's my grandmother's maiden name. Are you Jewish? Of course, Ava Greenberg was Jewish. And she said, yeah, I am. Have you ever gone to Hillel? And I said, no, I'm too scared because I don't know anything Jewish. I had never done Kabbalat Shabbat. I had never stepped foot, to my knowledge, in a synagogue. I didn't know any prayers. I didn't know Hebrew. And so I said, oh no, I haven't gone because I don't want to go by myself. She said, okay, well, I'm too scared to go by myself, so let's go together. We went together, and little did we know that after that Shabbat dinner at PSU, also the local chapter, I don't know if it even still exists, to be honest, of API was new, and they were having their first party. So after that Shabbat dinner, we went to the first API party. That isn't, you would think that that's what sold me, but no, it wasn't. It was great. And I was welcomed in very quickly, and so Hillel quickly became where I made my lifelong friends. I'm gonna call it Kelsey again. Kelsey's one of them. She's here, and that began my journey. And the Portland Hillel community and the Jewish community in this city has been where I started to learn everything. So how did we go from Jewish exploration to Israel? As Hannah mentioned, I co-founded the group Chai, Cultural and Historical Association for Israel, which is the Israel group at Portland State. And that came about when we had an event that was protested. There wasn't really an Israel presence on campus when I was there. There was a group called Christians United for Israel, and there was Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. And I personally knew absolutely nothing about Israel, the conflict. I didn't even know Israel was controversial. All I knew was, I'm Jewish, there's a Jewish country called Israel, there are countries in this world that have religions, and we like Israel because we're Jewish, and that was it. And someone named Amos, who maybe some of you know and maybe some of you don't know, the generation's previous predecessor to Eden, he was the first shaliach here in Portland, and he was also the first Israeli that I had ever truly interacted with or met. So Amos brought a film to PSU. It was about Israel. It was very apolitical, and this event was protested. We had students walk in with their hands tied, their mouths taped, and they sat for 10 minutes while someone filmed them, and then they walked out, and I was so confused. I had no idea what was going on, and I went up to Amos and I said, Amos, explain the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to me. And obviously he laughed because it was gonna be a long education, but this was kind of an awakening moment for me. At the time, Hillel was very different than it is now. I really do love the Hillel experience I had, but at the time Hillel was weary to touch Israel. And I can understand, it's a very scary thing. You don't want to get involved. It can be it's controversial, and it can be tough. It can be, it's very challenging. And Hillel at the time wasn't really interested in touching that. So that's when I went and decided, well, if the Jewish Student Union isn't going to speak up for Israel, then we are going to start a new group. And that is how we have Chai. So now you know the birth story of Chai. Things on campus were very different at the time that I was at Hillel, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the Hillel has come very, very far. I used to carry around a folder full of defaced flyers, and I had meetings with the chief diversity officer of PSU, who essentially told me, you chose an unpopular opinion to represent, so get used to this harassment that you're experiencing, and things like this. And fast forward to today, where I was lucky enough to participate in an alumni panel with high leaders, including Shani, and I've learned that the climate is so different, that we are having partnerships with faculty and administrators. The president of PSU was at this alumni panel and spoke there, and the student body president was there and spoke. And these are things that I could never have ever imagined would have happened. And I think that without the support of Hillel, the new, we have a great director here, Hannah, who's been here for a long time. You have people like Eden, who's now a legacy Israel fellow. I think these things are invaluable. And I know that my experience would not have been the way it was without those things. And even though it was harder when I was here, I can see that it was all worth it. And I've experienced all of these new leaders. And I just want to say, give yourself a hand if you're here. And I know everyone in this room has contributed to that. So I'm here to say, give yourself a hand for what you have done for Jewish students in Portland and those who come to the Portland community like myself.